Hi, I'm Aldo. Welcome to Plays the Thing, the channel where I share my experiences prepping and playing tabletop role-playing games. It's been a little while since I create truly new content. We haven't been able to play very much for all sorts of reasons, and this past week I was sick along with my wife and my kid. It was a tough weekend, but I feel human again, and so here I am ready to present you with this week's video, which is play report number 7 for the Gloaming campaign. The Gloaming is the campaign that we're playing in ShadowDark, which is the dark fantasy role-playing game written by Kelsey Dion and published through her company, the Arcane Library. All right, so here we are. Again, session 7. And please forgive me ahead of time if this video is a little bit thin or a little bit disjointed. I have trouble remembering things. We ran this session a few weeks ago, and again, there's been illness in between, so I don't know how much I remember in terms of details, but I'll certainly have stuff to talk about. So let's jump in and take a look at how things developed. And here we are. In order to get us started, I've taken us to the region map that I'm using for the game at this point. A reminder, this region map was created by Zandalar Fenwick and was posted on Reddit. It occurs to me that I should probably provide a link to this excellent map in the show notes. So I'll get around to doing that both for this video and for the previous video. And I'll also be using another map done by somebody else. And I'll talk about that when we get to it. All right. So anyway, to give you a brief reminder of where we were, the party had left Wardenwood, which is their home and headquarters, and decided to travel to Marin's Hold, which is the fishing village where you'll see the icon here sitting on the map, which I'm using as a representation of the party, right? And they'd gone to Marin's Hold because Renwick, our wizard, decided that he wanted to find more information on the Green Knights. The Green Knights being a legendary order of knights that had operated in this region maybe 100 years ago and had fought off infernal forces. And he figured that he could find, if he could find some of their ruins, or the ruins of their order, that he could maybe find something that could help him fight the demons that are infesting this region in the present, right? And they went to Marin's Hold to see if there were any different rumors they could gather there. And they had picked up some rumors. They'd picked up rumors of Bittermold Keep, which resided in the peninsula to the north. I'll ping on it on the map. Somewhere up in this peninsula, there were reports of strange things. Catfish that were kind of humanoid, small people moving into the ruins of Bittermold Keep melting like wax. And Renwick figured, well, a keep, it sounds like that's something that an order of knights might reside in. We should travel there to see if we can find anything related to the Green Knights. And where we ended the last session, they had decided to go and make that journey. So we're beginning this adventure with them setting off to find Bittermold Keep. They paid the fisherman that had given them the rumors off to maybe take them out when the fisherman went out to fish. Paid him a little bit extra to drop them off, and that's what we set out to do. Now, before I jump into how that went, I have to say that we had a shift in characters. First of all, let me introduce the cast for today. Renwick is back. My friend Jason playing Renwick is back. That's our wizard. Rowena, played by Lauren, is back. She is our witch. Ursula, the half-orc fighter, is back, played by Mike. This time we didn't have one of our warlocks, and that was, we lost Asher. Mario couldn't play this week, and so we lost Asher, but Andrew returned to the table, and so we have our other warlock at play. That's Kraith. And then we have a new player character. And This allows me to reflect a little bit on the new classes in ShadowDark. If you recall, Dan, who lost Sir Bernard in, a couple of sessions ago, as a replacement character, he made an Elven Ranger, Nixie. And he introduced her to the group, and it's interesting. Now, I like the Ranger build. I think the Ranger build is very cool. But Dan found that he made this Ranger and introduced it to the party, and there was a lot of overlap from Ursula, who was a fighter with the Ranger background, and from Rowena, the witch, who has the Treeborn background. And now, the Ranger background for the fighter, or really for any character who wants to take the Ranger background or rolls it if they decide to roll, allows you to do a lot of what a Ranger can do. Now, Rangers have unique abilities that somebody with just a background don't have. But a lot of those abilities have to do with herbs. And for the Treeborn background, we decided that Rowena has an affinity with the wood that allows her to do, to work with herbs and to be a healer, right? She has an affinity with the old parts of the woods, pre-infernal, right? She was born out of a tree, or at least found in the hollow of a tree. And so she has this connection, and so she has an intuitive sense of what's out there. So she gets advantage on things like, not exactly herbalism, but on, sort of a more intuitive herbalism, right? And again, the things that Rowena can do with that are not to the extent of what the Ranger class can do. But there was enough overlap from two different classes with backgrounds that Dan started to feel like, Nixie didn't have a role in the party. Now, I thought Nixie was a cool character, and Dan doesn't know this because it was all going on in the play in the GM's head. He has no reason why to know it, and I wasn't going to reveal it when he expressed his sort of disappointment with playing a Ranger given the circumstances of our table, because me sharing this at the moment wouldn't have made a difference. It wouldn't have changed what he was actually feeling. And so I said, whatever, make something else if you'd like. And we had a conversation about that, and he decided to make something else. But what he doesn't know is that Nixie's presence in the campaign, not so much because she was a Ranger, but more because she was an elf, the first elf we encountered in this particular campaign. Once he introduced her as a character, there were a whole set of things in the situation that was developing that suddenly clicked into place with me. I suddenly knew why the stuff that is happening in the Gloaming is happening. And Nixie's presence in some way clicked that for me in my brain. But I wasn't about to reveal that in the moment, because then there's this kind of artificial, like, hey, play her, even if you're not happy with her, play her, because eventually it'll pay out. And then I have to kind of like work towards having that pay off. And then it feels forced and pre-scripted. So I wasn't about to do that. So I just kept quiet and said, if you want to make another character, you can make another character. And so Dan opted to make a bard, a different character, a bard, right? So here she is. Her name is Ren. She is a bard, and she has the drawn background. She is drawn by something, right? And we'll get to that a little bit later. So the way that we explain that in play is that Nixie had some mysterious errands in the wood. The more she considered it, the more she didn't feel like she wanted to go to this peninsula to look for Bittermold Keep. We didn't say what it was, but we basically said that she stayed in Marin's Hold to make sure that nobody harassed the party. Because remember, when they arrived at Marin's Hold, there was a lot of suspicion that was kind of like, directed at Rowena and at Renwick. So we said that she stayed there long enough to make sure that they were not harassed, that they were about to get on the boat. And then she basically bid the party adieu and said, I have things to do. Perhaps we'll cross paths again. And so she kind of like exited. And simultaneously, the fact that Andrew was playing, and so the Kraith was back in the picture, was convenient, because we've already established that Kraith is back and forth from Marin's Hold to to Wardenwood. It's one of the things that he does. So we said that he just happened to be swinging back, on these caravans that he kind of escorts back and forth when he ran into the party, saw what they were going to do. They're friends, of course, so that he decided, yeah, I'll support you. And I just met this woman, Ren, who kind of approached me, and she seemed interested in in what I was doing and what we've experienced. And the drawn background was basically whispering to her that she should kind of join the party. And I actually, when I started play, I didn't realize that Dan had chosen the drawn background. So Dan wrote in that the drawn, that the whispers that she hears were the ones that kind of pushed Ren to kind of insinuate herself into the party. And so off they went. Okay. So we played out, and I'm going to start moving the token now. We played out this journey with random encounter rolls. I took it step by step. Every had them roll initiative, and every turn, right? In this case, basically every 2 hexes moved, I kind of asked if there was anything that was going on. Until we got to the shore over here, they asked to be deposited on the shore over here, and so they landed here. And it was funny because right when they landed, Lauren said, "Oh, by the way, Rowena, was there anything on that island that we sailed past?" Because she hadn't thought to ask in that moment. I think Lauren a little bit misinterpreted where the party was headed. She actually thought we were headed to the island, and when she saw that the icon had moved away from the island, she's like, "Oh, wait a minute, Rowena was interested in that island. Was there anything on there as we went by?" And I said, "Since you asked, right, go ahead and make a perception roll." She did, and she rolled well. And I'm like, "You noticed a tower poking out from the forested island, And when I said that, Jason was like, "Oh, if Renwick would have known that, he might have actually changed plans. He might have actually gone there instead." And then Lauren was like, "Well, you know what? Rowena thought you all had seen it, so she actually didn't say anything about it until we landed on the shores of this northern peninsula here." And as the sailors who rowed us aboard were kind of like already like rowing back to the fishing vessel, Rowena says, "Hey, when we go back, we should go to inspect that tower." And then Renwick was like, "What tower? What do you mean?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, the tower. I thought you guys all saw it." And he was like, "Oh, okay, fine. We should do that." So there was a little bit of a comedy moment there between the two of them. And then we kind of settled into a hex crawl. So Ursula, started making navigation checks. Made it through the first hex on the first night. I said this was arduous terrain or difficult terrain, so that they could move 1 hex per day. So they made it through the first hex perfectly. They had a random encounter that they rolled, and it was just moose, right? Actually, they didn't roll a random encounter. They wanted to know if there were any tracks in this part of the thing. And I rolled a random encounter check to see what had come by here, even though it wasn't there. And it was just some moose. And then they rested in the wood, and then they wanted to move into this hex. And I won't. Basically, they had a few uneventful nights, and Ursula actually failed one of her rolls and ended up, instead of going due north, which would have been the 3rd day of travel, she rolled randomly where she was going to go, right? One of the adjacent hexes, and ended up stumbling into the correct hex, right? So she actually accidentally found Bittermold Keep. So when they arrived at Bittermold Keep, I explained that what they saw was consistent with the rumors, right? I described how Bittermold Keep was melting. They were pretty careful about moving up slowly. They were asking questions about the area around it. I talked about how the stone was spongy and wax-like, and sometimes had dissolved into these kind of acidic pools. And then they slowly moved into Bittermold Keep itself, right? The ruins of the keep, right? Which I basically described as just the occasional standing wall, but mostly just foundations with this kind of like spongy ground that was kind of difficult to make out what was there because it was all kind of congealing into this kind of mess. So they were being very careful about stepping around. And they, I think it was Renwick and Ren stumbled across the river that runs, or I described it as a spring that came bubbling out of the water and kind of uh, flowed into a big kind of pool that was nestled against one of the semi-standing walls, and that then there was a crack in the earth where it was obvious the pool was kind of like emptying out into, right, going into this crevice in the ground and going somewhere underground. Renwick looked at that and said, "Okay, interesting, but not what I'm looking for." And he and Ren continued to move into the grounds, looking for some way of getting underground, some sort of trapdoor or something like that, right? Like Jason was very specific; he was looking for some sort of trapdoor. In the meantime, while they went over there, Ursula, Kraith, and Rowena were curious about that crevice. They actually went into the water. Kraith first, just blooshed into the water and started making his way to the crevice. Rolled to see if he had any encounters there, but he did not. Rowena also went into the water. Ursula was standing around, kind of like thinking they were sort of crazy and sort of like trying to stand guard. But despite them getting wet, Jason rolled a natural 20 and he found two things. He found halfling size footprints moving around and going into, that led him to a trapdoor, right? So he called out to the others and everybody kind of came out of the water and moved over to him. And then they were standing at the trapdoor that leads into the ruins of Bittermold Keep. And with that, I need to shift maps for us. So let's go ahead and do that. And here we are on the Foundry page on my scene for the ruins of Bittermold Keep. Now, let me see if I can switch perspectives here. Hold on a second. I'm going to switch to wall mode to see if you guys can see the map any better. Well, that's what I did to create, walls for the dungeon. So that's not what I want to do. Anyway, you guys can't see this map very well because of all the darkness, but you'll see it as I move the icon through the rooms that the party explored. It's a beautiful map. This map is done by Estimator NR1, also posted on Reddit. Again, I'll put a link to that page there. And if either Zandalar Fenwick or Estimator NR1 don't want me using this for these videos, and I get notified, I will stop using them. But they posted these for use by the community, which I think is so generous of them. So I'm assuming it's okay, but but I hope that assumption is correct. Anyway, so here they were standing in front of the ruins, and so they lit a torch and they started to move in. Right. The first thing they did is move into this space here. They found a room with a statue at the end. And they heard some noises coming from ahead somewhere. They continued. They explored this room briefly, didn't find anything, and continued to move in. And when they got into this room, this room had niches set into the walls with busts that were all kind of drooping and melting, right? And so they kind of explored this area and stuff. They noticed this patch on the ground right here, and this. Let me go ahead and remove that mark there. Let me see if I can grab that. Whoop, nope. Anyway, whatever. I don't need to do that. I'm being silly. Let me see. So they noticed right here where I'm pinging, there was an especially smooth spot on the floor. And Renwick figured that it would be what it was, kind of like a melted piece of it, right? What he didn't realize is how acidic this was. So Renwick went over, and without putting any weight on his body, he stuck his foot in it and pulled it back out, and it came out steaming. He took like 1 point of damage, right? And it came out like burning up from, not steaming, but burning up from the acid. And he kind of stumbled back with his foot in pain, kind of sat down and started to like bandage his foot and stuff. In the meantime, Kraith and the others figured out how to move around this piece. They heard voices coming from this room over here. When they peeked in, and it was Kraith who stealthed ahead by himself in the darkness. He actually extinguished his torch and moved in the darkness, noticing that there was a campfire in there. So he would let that campfire illuminate them, but he wanted to stay in darkness. And he stealthed in and looked, and he saw these howlers, right? That were, 12 kind of, barbarian halflings that were there eating like catfish and stuff. They didn't get close to them, so they couldn't make out more details, but they were sitting there barking and talking to one another, a language that Kraith couldn't understand. He was impressed by the number of them that there were, so he backed away and came back into this room and whispered, like, there are a dozen of these guys in there, and I don't know that we want to mess with them. I explained to Ursula, I said, Ursula, you who kind of come from the swamps, I said, you know that there aren't big halfling populations in this region. And the ones that you do know, the communities that you do know are kind of barbarian types. They don't, you've had halflings come from the north from more kind of shire-y places, right? But I'm like, that habit here, they are pretty sort of barbaric, nomadic, halfling folk that know how to defend themselves and resort to strength and cunning to kind of like protect their communities, right? So they're like, maybe we don't want to mess with that. So the party agreed, and they basically tiptoed around here, and they went into this chamber here. And look, there are their tokens. And then a lot of drama happened in this room. First, the room is, filled with charred bodies, old, burnt to a crisp skeletons wearing like burnt up armor and stuff like that. And there was a freshly burned corpse of a howler holding a silver dagger, but the rest of the body completely burned up, right? And there was also a compass rose in the middle of the floor. And so Renwick, who's always taking the lead, right? Renwick is just impulsive, and Jason plays him. I mean, he plays him like, not exactly like one of the doctors from Doctor Who, because he's his own thing. I don't want to say that Jason, but he does play him as that kind of character, right? This brainiac who has otherworldly powers because he's a wizard, and he's at the forefront of everything. He's half the time at least, he is leading the party, not just in terms of his mind, but in terms of actually being in the front. And I think Jason understands that this is brash and could get his character killed, but it's just that's the way he plays his character, because that's who this character is, right? So while the others kind of stood guard, Renwick moved into the center of the room, examined the compass rose, tried to cast detect magic. The spell fizzled on him. He had actually tried to cast light earlier, and that spell fizzled on him too. So that's why they were using torches and stuff. And then, kind of frustrated, he turned and he saw that dagger, and he went for it. Now, this is all written in the adventure. I didn't make any of this up, right? I mean, it'd be cool if I did, but I didn't. Credit where credit is due, which is to Kelsey's great adventure here. And it terrified me what was about to happen, because that dagger is, if it's not cursed, it's protected, right? And this dagger is a dagger that when somebody tries to take it from the person who possessed it before, they have to make I think it's a con save of like 12. If they fail, they take D100 damage. Now, this is a moment in this game where I'm not sure that I lived up to the spirit of the rules, and I'll explain why in a moment. Renwick, who had successfully cast Mage Armor, which doesn't really come into play in any sort of mechanical way in this particular encounter, but he did have about 5 rounds left of a mage armor spell on. Grabbed it and failed his save. I tell Jason, oh my gosh, this is potentially really bad. This is like a Call of Cthulhu adventure because you take D100 points of damage. Jason's like, I die. I have like 5 hit points left. Let's see what happens. I roll the dice and I rolled a 92. So Renwick took 92 points of damage. Now here's where I don't know that I played this correctly. Right? One way of looking at 92 points, and it's certainly the way that Jason looked at it, was that it's an instant kill. And Jason is a great player. He's very mature about this. He was like, he's dead. He's burnt to a crisp. It almost felt like he was about to break into a Monty Python thing where he would say more and more exaggerated ways of describing the degree to which he was destroyed and burnt up. Now, the way I interpreted it was a little different, right? I'm like, look, and maybe I'm wrong because I actually haven't gone back to look to see if I'm wrong, but my recollection is that the book never says anything about like when you drop to 0 hit points, regardless of what you roll on the dice, that anything is an instant kill. I could be wrong about that. Maybe there's a rule in here about catastrophic damage. I should look that up. You know, some sort of overwhelming amount of damage that would just instantly kill you, no chance. But I don't remember that, and I still haven't looked it up, and I didn't remember it at the time. So I'm like, wait, according to the rules, you're at 0, but, you know, so you could die. But you still have the opportunity here to, one, we have to see how many rounds you have until you are actually dead. And 2, people have a chance to bring you around. Now, let's be clear. We lost Sir Bernard under those rules before. So, you know, rolling a 15 or better on that stabilization roll is not easy. I've seen folks fail at that repeatedly, right? And get quite a tense situation. And in one case, we lost the character already. And so, you know, yes, there's a good chance that Renwick could die, given the way I was interpreting this at the moment. But the way it played out was this. Jason rolled the die to see how many rounds Renwick had, and he rolled a 4 on the die. He has a +1 constitution, so he had 5 rounds for folks to try. Rowena dropped what she was doing and ran over. She had the initiative. The initiatives worked out in this way. Ran over to help her friend. I said only one person can try to revive him at a time. We're not going to do the train of people like, okay, it's my turn on this round. I tried to revive him, didn't work. I moved. The next person steps in, tries, and moves. I'm like, no, that's stupid. We're not going to do that. One person can help at a time. So if you're the person that gets to him, you're the person who tries. And if you want the next round, if there is another round, you can switch out with somebody else, and then that person could try that round. But one person tries per round. Okay. Rowena is the one who had initiative. She rushed to her friend's side. Dropped what she was doing, rushed to his side, made the stabilization roll. She has a -1 intelligence. So she has a lower than average chance of succeeding. She rolled an 18. First shot. And, you know, Renwick snaps out of it. And the way we sort of explained it was, you know, must have been something about that mage armor spell. And of course, Rowena's healing salves and immediate treatment to help him with the shock. And maybe something more, right? Because it occurred to Jason and to Rowena, right? To Jason and to Lauren, that this is the 3rd time that Renwick wakes up to see Rowena looking down at him, pulling him out of oblivion, right? She saved him in that way when they were facing off against Greaves Redthorn. She saved him in that way when he had been, I think it was when he was felled by the ooze demon thing that they found back at the camp when they had returned. And now again. So it was this kind of cool moment where, you know, I think Rowena held her hand out and and Renwick took it. And Jason described how Renwick like stands up, and when he stands up, he pulls her close and then whispers in her ear, "Never leave my side," which was this really touching moment. Because remember, these two characters began this campaign fighting at each other, right? Because Renwick is kind of sexist and, or at least, yeah, he is, and brusque and abrasive, and Rowena doesn't appreciate the first and is charismatic and empathetic and compassionate. So they've been like this, but they have a mutual respect for each other's abilities, and they've seen a lot together by this point. And it was just a beautiful moment, right? Beautiful moment. And maybe I'll reflect a little bit on that more at the end. Let me just kind of finish the narrative for what happened tonight. But I thought that was a really, really, really cool moment. And then from there, it kind of turned into this whirlwind thing, because while all of that was going on, Kraith and Ursula were inspecting. I'll move this to where they were inspecting. They were kind of inspecting over here. I should zoom in a little closer here, right? They were inspecting down this hall. They couldn't really hear anything. They were listening. They didn't want to go down. They couldn't hear anything. And then Ren and Rowena and Renwick came in here, and there's this glass bowl there, this white glass bowl there with ashes in the middle. And given what Renwick had just experienced, there was no way that he was going to start messing around with ash and stuff like that. So he made this kind of like passing comment about it, and then started to leave. In the meantime, the others had been trying to open this door over here, which had been closed, and not getting too far. They couldn't open it. Try as they might, they failed their attempts to bust it down and stuff like that. And so they had kind of moved back down to inspect that hall they were looking at. And so Renwick and Rowena had moved up to this locked door. Renwick at this point has 1 hit point, right? He comes back with he'd come back with 1 hit point, or they had, forget exactly how. Wait, did I do that right? I have to look at the healing rules again. Should he have had 1 hit point, or should he had just been stabilized and unconscious? That's a good question. I might have screwed that up. In any case, they would have just, oh man, I have to look at that. I might have screwed up on that. If I didn't already screw up by not like insta-killing him, but it's just not the way that I had interpreted the rules at the moment. But anyway, Renwick, we had said, had 1 hit point, and they were standing in front of that door, and enough rounds had gone by. I rolled, and I'd been rolling the whole night, round by round by round, because they've been a little bit slow moving. They like to move into a chamber, and 1 or 2 people are doing things while others are just kind of standing around. So there are ways in which stuff doesn't get done, and the rounds tick by and tick by and tick by. But I kept missing the random encounter roll. Well, this time I made the random encounter roll. I rolled to see what happened, and it was 6 bitter molds carrying or dragging along 3 captured howlers. And so I also rolled proximity, and it was close, like they were right there. So the only place it made sense for them to go is as they were trying to fiddling around with the lock still, trying to figure out how to open, the door just opened, and they came to face with a bitter mold, right? And the bitter molds, of course, are the original inhabitants of the keep, which are at this point kind of like, they themselves are kind of like sagging and wet, and they're not melting exactly, but they're almost like their bones are softened and kind of turning into jelly, and they're kind of like shambling humans that are constantly like dripping liquid, right, and stuff like that. And they were wearing these simple tunics, and they had short swords and slings and this kind of long hair that was kind of like sticking to their skin and stuff like that. And they were carrying, the way I described it was that the one that opened the door had a couple of others behind him. The 3 more behind them were pounding away at these howlers that they had tied up and basically knocking them unconscious. So when Renwick opened the door and he sees like this act of violence happening back there, and this like kind of sinister looking guy kind of looking at him, he pulled Rowena. He stepped back and pulled Rowena kind of behind him and stuff like that. He was in a real moment of danger. I rolled to see what the reaction was going to be, and the bitter molds were only suspicious. So they started asking questions. and they got into this kind of tense negotiation. And at that point, Kraith, who had heard what was happening going down the hall, he came around the corner, saw what it was, didn't like the look at it, pulled out his sword and just led them to fight. Like, he just like, no parlaying here. Rowena was trying to work them. Ren was trying to work them a little bit. They were starting to talk. There was a possibility that maybe they could actually like get on the good side of the bitter mold, depending on what they said and how the dice roll went. Kraith just cut all that out. He jumped in and just went to work. Now, here's another moment where I have to reflect on the new classes. And I feel like I made some incorrect decisions here in retrospect. The Bard. I had watched Kelsey make the Bard, when she did so online. And I was really impressed with the Bard as it appeared in that original draft, because they were not magical characters. None of their abilities were overtly magical. They were very social. They had a lot of versatility, but they were really jacks of all trades, and they were about knowledge, and they were about interaction. And I'm like, that's really cool. I hadn't taken a look at the revised Bard, which is largely the same and is still a really cool class. But the thing that threw me for a loop was that Dan's like, I pull out my lute, Ren pulls out her lute, starts playing it, and if I make it 15 or better, I get to roll to see how many of them are transfixed and for how long. And actually, no, all the targets they don't have to roll. All the targets, if he made the roll, right? If Ren made the roll, all the targets in near area are transfixed for how many number of rounds. And I'm like, oh, I don't remember that. Okay. And so he rolls, and I'm thinking about it. I'm like, what? I look it up at that point, and I see Fascinate is the ability that allows a bard to do this. And rolled and succeeded. And so they're all transfixed for how many rounds? Like, whatever, 4 rounds, 6 rounds, whatever it is. Maximum. Rolled maximum on the die. And I was like, that's not what the bard is supposed to be. I watched Kelsey make it. The bard is not supposed to be. I mean, that just seemed beyond just normal, right? That seemed like magic. I'm like, that's not what the bard's supposed to be. That must be. And so I'm like, I think we need to see how we interpret the word transfixed. What does that mean? And I came to the conclusion, like, this is an ability that must be intended to be used kind of in non-combat situations, right? The type of thing where you could, play a song and draw everybody's attention and allow your allies to do something in the background or something like that. That's what she must have meant by transfixed, is what I was thinking. But I didn't want to chintz Dan out, especially since he had had a bad taste in his mouth with the Ranger, right? I didn't want to have his effort. I was convinced that that's the way that this ability should be interpreted. But I didn't want to do that in the moment because Dan and I hadn't had an opportunity, and I felt like he was just going to get robbed of this. So I kind of hemmed and hawed, and I didn't want to make a quick decision. I said, look, I think the way that we're going to do this is this. I said, they are transfixed in the moment. The moment that there's an attack, they're going to snap out of it. But I think they're probably still disoriented enough that they're going to be making their attack rolls with disadvantage for those 4 rounds, right? For those 4 rounds. So that's what we did. And to be honest, it ended up being, even though I've since, after that session, I went online and I asked around, and Kelsey gave a bit of a response, but really more than Kelsey, other folks, which I appreciate, Kelsey just not wanting to tell people how to play the game, right? It's really up to me to determine how I'm going to run bards in my game. But I am interested about the original intent. So a lot of other folks chimed in and said, look, this is supposed to be kind of like a Pied Piper's ability. The Pied Piper's ability, it is supposed to be kind of like magic. It's not just playing a song and distracting folks, which is something I don't like in fantasy gaming. When Kelsey responded, she said, yeah, this is kind of sorcery like elf kings and witches possess. And, I don't like the idea of like the bard playing an instrument in the middle of combat. I really don't like that at all. But the way that Kelsey phrased that, rather poetically, right? or evocatively at least, right? And the way that also another one of the respondents talked about like the Pied Piper, and kind of pointed out like, look, there are other classes who have abilities like this. Like a sleep spell from a wizard is very similar, with some trade-offs here and there, but it is similar. And this is really the bard's signature ability. And that's when I realized, okay, at some point in playtesting, Kelsey decided to give the bard a kind of a mystical thing that they didn't have in the first iteration of the bard. And it does match up with the sleep spell, and so it's fair. I shouldn't kind of cheapen it, right? So going forward, the way that we're going to run it is that transfix does mean that they are kind of enthralled in a supernatural sense. But I am ruling that once a transfixed person is attacked, the transfixed condition wears off, right? So you can get a surprise attack on somebody who's transfixed, but after that, you're not going to get 3 more or 4 more attacks on their 6, whatever, multiple rounds of that. You'll get 1 and then they'll snap out of it. In the same way that if you attack somebody who's affected by a sleep spell and they if somebody who's hit by a sleep spell is in some way hit but doesn't die, they'll wake up, right? So that's the way, and that's the way that, again, folks online recommended that they run it. And I'm like, I can live with that. What I didn't want were 2 things. One, the bard in play, like, doing a rock concert in the middle of combat. That's just the way I put it on the discussion. It cheapens my Conan theme, right? Or vibe. I just find it silly. And 2, I didn't like the idea of it just instantly taking them out to the point where, it was just multiple strikes on people who were just standing there getting hacked, that I didn't like. But the discussion really helped me to arrive at something that I think will work for our group. So I felt bad about that moment. I in the end, I don't think I ruined Dan's moment. Dan seems still happy with Ren, from what I understand. And, I think he'll be happier when he learns about this ruling, because I think it'll make sense to him. But, a little bit of, it was whatever. It was again, I feel like I made a mistake today, and that's fine. Or not today, but when I ran this, and that's fine. So anyway, the fight was pretty quick. They took down the bitter molds, and then they untied the howlers, and they decided to parlay with them. The howlers were appreciative. They explained, yes, they're the ones that identified these guys as the bitter molds. He's like, the bitter molds, yes, the hated bitter molds. Our leader, Gordok, says, I think it's Gordok, right? Gordok says that they must be cast away into oblivion, right? This is what he kept saying. And, the party's like, well, we don't like those guys, obviously, so that doesn't sound bad to us. We could use some allies. So, and obviously Renwick and some of the others need to rest and heal and recuperate resources. So they offered to take them to their leader. And so we ended the session with that agreement that the party would go and meet, I think his name is Gordok, right? But the halfling chieftain who brought his tribe here to rid this place of the bitter molds, right? The accursed bitter molds. And that's where we ended up. So, I think we might play this again. Here, let me switch away from the map since we are done with that. Let me see if this makes sense. Yeah, here we are. Okay. So, that's where we ended the session. I think we're going to be able to play again this weekend. We were supposed to play this past weekend, but again, I was sick and Lauren was sick, so that didn't happen. But hopefully this upcoming weekend. If we don't get to play this weekend, I am going to be traveling. I'm going to be in Greece actually for about 10 days. And so I might not be able to post for a little bit, for about 2 weeks. And that's going to set my gaming behind as well, which is fine. Greece will be fun to do. I get to go there with my school. But we'll see. Hopefully I'll be able to post session 8 before I leave. In the meantime, we want to get back to Midnight Sun. That'll probably be out about a month before we can continue that game. I definitely hope to do that. And we've had to postpone Champions Now, the Sentinels of Justice, again. We were supposed to play this past week, but again, illness. So it looks now like we're going to play the first Sunday in April. So all three of those games will be getting the rollout. Again, I also have plans for Supers that I'm working on. That's why I posted that video that I posted last week on the hero sheet, or the Roll20 sheet for Supers. And finally, I ran across a new game this weekend that I'll be talking about soon. It's not a new game, it's an old game, but it's new to me, and I'm excited to try it out. And that's Advanced Fighting Fantasy. I'd heard of Advanced Fighting Fantasy in a passing way at some point. Read about it in passing, but I never really delved into it. And I saw somebody do a YouTube video on it. I'm like, wow, that sounds kind of cool. And then I bought it and I looked at it. I'm like, wow, this could be a lot of fun. So if I do that game, I'm probably going to do the Stellar Adventures version, so that I'm not doubling or tripling down on my fantasy gaming, and I can do a different idiom of role playing for that game. But anyway, I hope to post something on that soon. But before I go, let me circle back to something that I wanted to say about ShadowDark. I've read a lot of folks say, like, ShadowDark is great for a one shot. ShadowDark is great for short-term play or short-term campaigns. I don't see why it has to be limited to that. I really don't. This campaign has legs. I'm not sure how much I'll extend it beyond the stuff that's here in the Curse Scroll #1. I might. It depends. We'll see how it goes. But certainly with the stuff that's here, I can see a lot more play happening. And the party is at this point about to hit level 3, right? The original characters who are still around are probably about to hit level 3 soon. And the other thing is that it doesn't, I hear a lot of folks talk about ShadowDark as this brutal, lots of characters die all the time kind of game. Life is cheap. It doesn't really, you don't invest too much in the characters because the characters come and go and all of that. And there is a sense of danger and threat, certainly, to the game, but it hasn't been a constant death fest. And I like the sense of danger in my games, but I don't love games because characters get to die all the time, right? Like, that's not why I love a game or why I enjoy playing a game. I just think that if you don't have the threat of death, the real possibility of death, the occasional death, that the game feels, it lacks a tension that makes it sort of boring. But it's not this campaign hasn't been a campaign about life being cheap. Even when we lost a character, right, there was like the characters and the players kind of mourned it. There was it meant something. And here we have quite sort of unexpectedly in this adventure this touching relationship that seems to be developing between Renwick and Rowena. And there's this real sense of humanity, right, that has sparked in this game. So like, I don't know, I just don't want to see ShadowDark kind of boxed into something that it has to be, something that fits with an OSR label, that if you're not doing it in this metal way, it's not what, you're not doing it right. I'm fine with playing it however you want, of course, but it just seems like the way that we often talk about games like ShadowDark, not just ShadowDark, that it kind of like limits what they can turn into through a kind of emergent play, right? Like, through whatever spirit the players imbue it with. And that's not to say that the system doesn't set certain constraints on what it can become, or at least shape some of what it will be. But even within that, right? Like it can be lots of things. And I'm just liking the way that this is shaping up, and I can certainly see it going for a long time. So in the end, I'm really loving ShadowDark. I'm really enjoying ShadowDark. All the different versions of it that I've done, that I've GM'd. Certainly the Gloaming, Midnight Sun. We've only done 2 sessions, but they've been so fun, and they feel different from this game, right? Because again, that's to the credit of the way that Kelsey has written them to have very different feels, and it feels really cool. And then the one shots that I ran in preparation for running these longer games, all of them have been fun. So anyway, those are my musings. That's my play report. Those are my musings. As always, until next time, I wish you good health. I wish you good cheer. I wish you good gaming.